All right, y'all, I need to talk about this ridiculous outcome where a bunch of EA executives try to give themselves a massive salary bump. This is a really fascinating insight into how executives get paid and how they're paid sometimes hundreds of times higher than the average worker. It's a big problem, not just in the gaming industry, but also a huge problem in big companies overall. It's really fascinating to see this kind of stuff shared publicly because so much of, boardroom battles and executive pay stuff tends to fly in under the radar. I mean, it's part of the reason why executives have been able to get away with paying themselves with such crazy salaries here. It's because the average person doesn't really hear about them. And it's not that they try to hide this kind of stuff. The reality is executive pay, especially for public companies, have to be disclosed, right? In their financial statements they put out as being part of a public company, they're required to share that. But it's oftentimes buried in a whole bunch of other stuff that most people don't read. It's not like they feel like they have a shot to do anything about it. If you own stock in a company, you are a shareholder. You own a piece of the company. It's not just that you own stock and you can flip it and try to make more money. The whole point is that you are now a part owner of something. Now, I think the US economy has grown to the point where if you own a couple of shares of EA, you don't really feel like you actually are a part owner of EA. It feels like you own stock, something that just doesn't feel real to most people. It's not like you ever get to decide like what the employees get to eat, what offices they get to move into, what features you get to have built, how much executives get paid. Like those things feel so far removed of being a shareholder. Now, the thing is that there are shareholders that have massive influence, and these are usually shareholders that are really big in scale, and they may sometimes own as much as 5% to 20% of a company. Just because you may have a sentiment of like, I don't like what's going on, this should change. The reality is having 20% voting rights doesn't mean anything could ever really pass. And I think that's part of what has happened here with executive pay. When executives go through this process where they can increase their salary, it doesn't feel like there's many things you can do to stop that. And it's crazy to think that an executive can decide how much they should get paid, right? Like who gets to decide that? Maybe if you're the boss of your own company, literally the CEO of a company that you founded from the ground up, but for a public company that is billions of dollars in size, the fact that you can be with a group of other people and agree upon, well, hey, why don't you increase my salary? And you know what? If you do that, why don't you increase your salary as well, right? The CTO, the CFO, the CEO, they all get to make those kind of decisions. Now, part of the things that they do try to hide is that it doesn't come across like, well, here's the salary. More often than not, these things are packaged together as stock options. Stock options being that they get stock just like a lot of employees get stock when they join these kind of companies. So oftentimes it just comes across like stock. People don't necessarily always equate stock to income. That's mainly because stock options usually have a vesting period or some sort of goal that an executive has to hit in order for that stock to become available. The executives here at the company had decided to bump their salary up. The CEO, Andrew Wilson, wanted to bump his salary up from about $18 million to about $21 million. Now, that doesn't seem like a major bump, but the other executives, they got massive bumps, right? The CFO, Blake Jorgensen, was making $9.4 million in 2019, and he wanted to bump that up to almost $20 million, more than double his income. And the chief studio officer, Laura Miley, was making about $7 million and wanted to bump that up to $16 million. And the CTO, Kenneth Moss, wanted to bump his salary up from $7 million to $14 million. Look at this. These people are literally increasing the salary by times 2 to almost times 3. Can you ever imagine working for a company where you did so well, the boss says, you know what? You're doing great, John. Let me bump your salary up from $80,000 to $160,000. That doesn't happen. It never happens. But it happens for these executives. Now, what they were trying to say here is that, well, we think we deserve this because this year has been a remarkable year for us. We're making crazy amount of money because, the pandemic and people are staying home and they're spending money. So that's how they were able to justify it. They're like, we think we deserve it. Can you imagine any other scenario in life where you can just say, you know what? boss, I think I'm doing really well in this job. I'm not actually working that much harder. I'm not doing actually anything that's different. It's just that the market's a lot better. So why don't you double my salary? Yeah, exactly my point. That's ridiculous. In fact, it was so ridiculous that shareholders actually were able to get enough votes to say, hell no. No way this is reasonable. This is just flat out robbery. Now, if you're wondering how it got to this point and why this is such a remarkable situation, there's two things here that I think you need to understand. One is that executives actually can't just willy-nilly decide that they want to bump their salary. They do have to answer to a board of directors. And board of directors are people that are put in place to, in a sense, look over the company, how it's performing, and the executives. It's a little bit of checks and balances, but the reality is it's a false sense of checks and balances. Think about it this way. Who actually picks the board of directors? Well, usually it's the executives. And these executives, well, they're not going to put people in place to look after them who are their mortal enemy. They're not going to pick people that they know are going to disagree with them. They're picking people that they know is likely to side with them in just about every decision they make. So it's the biggest con in the executive play. I mean, I've seen this happen even in the startup world, where I've been in meetings in a startup company as a senior executive, and we have one of these board meetings which happen every quarter. These board people come in. They don't actually work for the company directly. Oftentimes, these board of directors are very big people themselves. They may be CEOs of their own companies, as an example. But they come in about every quarter and they meet up and they listen to a progress report, a presentation of how the company is doing, and if they're going to do anything crazy when things are about to happen. So I've been a part of these meetings, and I have never, ever heard a board of director meeting resulted in them going like, CEO, this is a bad decision. If you do this, we will oust you. No, come back with another presentation, come back with another plan. It has always been universally, yes, all right, go for it. Like, they'll raise concern. They'll raise like, yeah, you should think about this. But ultimately, they're agreeing with the CEO. And you can kind of think about it this way, because if the executives were able to pick the board of directors, it means that they can also fire them. So it's really the cushiest job in the world. In fact, it's even better than being a CEO of a company, because board of directors really don't even have to work. You just kind of sit back and let things happen. And then you come in once a quarter and go like, yeah, that was pretty cool. Great job. As well as the company's doing well, they pay you, they give you shares, so you're just getting easy money. It behooves you not to rock the boat. It's not your job to rock the boat. And therein lies the rub. It means that ultimately there is only really one course of action that can stop these executives from getting exorbitant pay, and that is shareholders. So this situation here with EA is remarkable because it is almost unheard of for enough shareholders to rally together and vote down a scenario where they're like, this pay is ridiculous. No way you deserve it. In fact, there's been a study by Harvard Business School that showed that only about 3% of such votes ever actually going through. Now, CTW has led a public campaign recently against excessive executive pay over at Activision because the CEO, Bobby Kotick, paid himself nearly $30 million. Now, I actually like Bobby. He's also a former alum of Columbia Business School, which I went to. But this kind of behavior is ridiculous because that is over 319 times more than the average salary of an Activision employee. That is not something that is reasonable. It is an outright scandal. By the way, if you want a comparison, the CEO of EA, his average pay is about 200 times more than the average EA employee salary. Now, what I hope this is doing here is inspiring more and more shareholders to speak up and vote down these ridiculous pay packages. And it seems to be a trend. I think what we're starting to see here is that, well, America is now under this wave of realization that there's a huge level of inequality that is going on here. I'm not even just talking about executive pay. I'm talking about pay between gender and minorities. The fact that no one reveals their salary means that companies can get away with this kind of behavior. And even when they reveal their salaries like these executives have, the fact that they can kind of decide what they want to do with a board of directors that is readily go for type of thing, because they know, hey, if I give you money, you can give me money. Hey, executive, CFO, you want more money? Well, make sure you give me more money as a CEO because, hey, we're in this together. these people all in cahoots to each other. Not a good structure. I think there's some accountability issues here that need to be addressed. And I think corporate America is in for a reckoning if they don't deal with something like this right now.